The sound came first, not a scream, not a voice, but metal resisting metal as the cutting tool bit into the surface of a sealed container hidden deep in the wilderness. Sparks flew briefly, then died, swallowed by the quiet of the mountain air, as if nature itself was holding its breath. When the final lock gave way and the lid shifted, something else escaped before anyone could see inside. A smell so heavy, so unmistakable, that every person present instinctively stepped back. It was the smell of time rotting, of heat and silence working together, of something that should never have been sealed away. This was not an accident, not neglect, not nature taking its course. This was death, deliberately trapped, compressed into a metal box where air had been denied and days had passed without mercy. 10 long days had sealed the truth inside, 10 days of heat, darkness and decay, waiting to be discovered. In that moment, before a single name was spoken, everyone knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever lay inside had not been meant to be found. The container itself looked ordinary at first glance, military green, scarred by age, the kind of box meant for equipment, not secrets. It sat where it didn't belong, dragged and abandoned as if even the earth had rejected it. No warning labels, no markings, no explanation for why something so heavy had been moved so far from any road. The smell told a story long before the eyes could confirm it, a story of confinement, of panic, frozen in time, of a final moment that no one had witnessed. Whoever placed this box here believed distance and isolation would erase responsibility, believed steel and locks could silence what happened inside. But death does not disappear simply because it is hidden. It waits, it seeps, and eventually it demands to be acknowledged. This discovery would unravel lies, expose a carefully constructed illusion, and reveal how close violence can live to ordinary life. And this was only the beginning. Katlyn and Heather were twins, but that word never felt strong enough to describe what connected them. From the moment they were born, their lives moved in parallel, not as two separate paths, but as one shared rhythm. Growing up in Lewistown, Pennsylvania, they became known for finishing each other's sentences, laughing at the same unspoken thoughts, and sensing emotional shifts without a single word being exchanged. Friends noticed it, family relied on it, and over time it became something almost instinctive. Even distance never weakened it. As adults, living separate lives in different towns, that bond only adapted, transforming into daily rituals that never broke. A phone call every single day, no exceptions. If life got too busy, there were texts. If words weren't possible, there was reassurance through a small digital dot on a screen. For them, connection was not optional. It was survival. And nothing, not exhaustion, not stress, not chaos, was allowed to interrupt it. Katlyn's life was full, overwhelming at times, but always driven by love. She was a mother of 5 children, balancing responsibilities that would have broken many people. She worked multiple jobs, attended treatment appointments, and fought quietly every day to become a stronger version of herself for the children who depended on her. Yet no matter how heavy the day had been, she always made time for Heather. Sometimes the calls were long and emotional, sometimes they were short and tired, but they always happened. They talked about their children, their worries, their dreams, and the things they were afraid to say out loud to anyone else. When distance separated them physically, the Life 360 app became a silent comfort, a way to know the other was safe without speaking. Seeing that familiar location dot wasn't about control, it was about peace of mind. As long as it moved, everything was okay. People who knew Katlyn described her as gentle, generous, and deeply loyal, someone who carried pain quietly but never stopped showing up for others. She had a heart that forgave easily and a spirit that refused to harden, even after life tested her repeatedly. Heather understood this better than anyone, because twins don't just hear words, they feel truth. She knew Katlyn's patterns, her habits, her emotional language, and most importantly, what she would never do. Katlyn would never disappear without a word. She would never abandon her children. She would never break the one connection that had remained constant since childhood. This unbreakable bond, built over decades, would become more than love or loyalty. It would become a compass. And when that daily rhythm suddenly stopped, Heather would know, with chilling certainty, that something was terribly wrong. This bond would later save the truth. From the outside, The man in the house looked unremarkable. A husband, a father, a familiar face in a quiet Pennsylvania community where lives rarely drew attention. There was nothing about him that demanded suspicion at first glance. Nothing that warned of danger in daylight conversations or passing interactions. But violence does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it settles quietly behind closed doors, masked by routine, protected by silence, and dismissed as private matters. The man Katlyn lived with carried a history that did not disappear, simply because time had passed. It lingered beneath the surface, unseen by many, but carefully documented in places most people never look. Court records, police reports, and the experiences of one woman who had already lived through what others had not yet imagined. Years earlier, in 2018, those records painted a very different picture. Charges had been filed for terroristic threats, reckless endangerment, simple assault, and harassment, all tied to allegations of domestic violence. The victim was his first wife, Catelyn Harp, a woman who had been married to him for 7 years and shared 3 children with him. The accusations were serious enough to require a $10,000 bail, a clear signal that authorities believed the threat was real. Those who lived nearby remembered police vehicles outside the home, raised voices, and moments that ended too abruptly to feel normal. Stephanie was seen with bruises she tried to hide, her light dimming gradually as the years passed. She had come forward, documented the fear, and survived the relationship. But survival, as it would later become clear, did not guarantee safety forever. On March 13, 2021, Catelyn Harp died at the age of 33. Her death was officially ruled an overdose, a conclusion that brought closure on paper but left questions unanswered in the minds of those who knew the history. After her death, there was no deeper investigation, no re-examination of the past violence, no connection made beyond the surface explanation. Life moved on, records were archived, and suspicion faded into memory. But patterns do not vanish simply because they are ignored. They wait for repetition. When this man remarried, few realized that the same controlling behaviors were slowly resurfacing, familiar to him, invisible to others. And in the quiet spaces of another home, the conditions for history to repeat itself were already forming. June 19th began like so many other days, ordinary in every visible way. Morning routines unfolded without warning signs. Children were cared for, responsibilities handled, and life moved forward on familiar tracks. There was no dramatic argument witnessed, no frantic call for help, no moment that stood out as the last one. From the outside, it was just another evening settling in, another day coming to a close in a quiet home. At 6:45 that evening, the daily ritual held true. A phone call connected 2 voices that had spoken every single day for years. The conversation was casual, unremarkable, almost comforting in its normality. They talked about the day, about children, about small plans that carried no urgency. There was no tremor of fear, no coded warning, no hint that this call would be the final one. To anyone listening, it sounded like nothing more than what it was supposed to be normal. After the call ended, technology quietly continued its role as a silent witness. The Life 360 app still showed movement, still placed her exactly where she was expected to be, inside the home she shared with her husband. Everything appeared consistent, predictable, and unchanged. Hours passed without disruption, without signals of distress. There was no sudden departure, no frantic drive, no digital footprint of escape. Her voice from earlier still lingered in her sister's memory, tired perhaps, but calm and present. Mothers of 5 are often exhausted, and that exhaustion did not raise alarms. Nothing about that evening suggested danger was closing in. And yet, somewhere between the comfort of routine and the trust built over years, the last normal moment slipped quietly into history. Unnoticed, unmarked, and irreversible. Sometime after the evening settled into silence, the digital trail changed in a way that felt subtle at first, almost easy to dismiss. The Life 360 location stopped updating, freezing her position in place as if time itself had paused. Apps glitch, batteries die, signals drop, and most people accept those explanations without hesitation. But this wasn't just a technical detail. It was a break in a pattern that had never failed before. Phone records would later show the last confirmed activity coming from inside the home late that night. After that, nothing. No movement, no outgoing calls, no signs of life beyond a device sitting still. Then, a message appeared. A text sent from her phone, brief and unemotional, claiming she needed space, claiming she needed a break, asking that her belongings not be touched. On the surface, it could have passed as stress speaking, but to those who knew her, every word felt misplaced. The message didn't sound like her, read like her, or feel like her. There was a spelling error she would never have made, a tone that lacked her usual warmth, and a detachment that contradicted everything she was. Most alarming of all was what the message implied, that she had chosen to leave, that she had willingly stepped away from her children without explanation or preparation. Anyone who truly knew her understood how impossible that was. She planned everything around her kids, worried constantly about their well-being, and never disappeared without ensuring they were safe. This single message did more than confuse. It triggered a deep psychological alarm, the kind that bypasses logic and goes straight to instinct. Friends and family read it and felt the same chill, the same unspoken certainty. Something was wrong. This was not her voice speaking, and whatever had silenced her real one was already rewriting the story. Morning came, and with it, an absence that felt heavier than any message could explain. For the first time in years, the phone stayed silent. No call, no text, no familiar check-in that had never once been missed. As the hours passed, concern tightened into something sharper, something that refused to be ignored. Calls went unanswered, messages remained unread, and the frozen location on the app did not change. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a busy morning, it was a complete break from everything she had ever done. By the afternoon, instinct overpowered hope. At 4 o'clock, the decision was made to involve authorities, not out of panic, but out of certainty. Something had gone wrong, and waiting would only waste time that might already be slipping away. When police were contacted, details poured out quickly, every habit explained, every pattern emphasized. She lived at a home on Fairview Drive with her husband, and she never vanished without explanation. Officers arrived for a welfare check, and there, the calm explanation was already waiting. An argument, he said, a disagreement after dinner. She left, he claimed, and he didn't know where she had gone. He showed the text message as proof, presenting it as closure rather than cause for alarm. On the surface, it sounded reasonable, even cooperative, but calm does not equal truth, and experienced officers understand that composure can be rehearsed. While no immediate evidence justified action, something about the situation lingered. A woman had vanished without a trace, without money, without her children, and the only explanation came from the person who had been with her last. As the search moved beyond the first day, small details began to collide with each other, creating fractures in the story that had initially sounded complete. Statements were repeated, then slightly adjusted, then reshaped entirely as questions became more specific. At first, the timeline seemed firm, but with each retelling, it shifted. One version placed events neatly in order, another removed key moments altogether. He claimed he had met with a counselor the morning after the disappearance, then later said that meeting never happened. He said he had his phone with him, then corrected himself and said it had been left behind. These weren't dramatic contradictions, but investigators know that truth does not need revision. Each inconsistency chipped away at credibility, transforming suspicion into focus. Digital evidence soon began to speak louder than words. Cell phone data showed movement that did not match the story being told. Locations appeared that had never been mentioned, places with no innocent explanation, routes through rural areas, stops that served no daily purpose, moments where the device lingered far longer than necessary. The phone was talking, even when its owner tried to stay silent. Screenshots of messages were offered as proof of concern, but they failed to align with activity records. Investigators recognized the pattern immediately, a narrative shaped around what could be explained, and silence around what could not. When technology contradicted testimony, the balance tipped decisively toward investigation. By the third day, the case had outgrown the limits of a small township. The decision was made to escalate, bringing in state-level resources capable of handling complexity and scale. Pennsylvania State Police took over, and the search expanded in every direction. Drones lifted into the air, scanning dense forests and remote terrain. K-9 units worked through wooded areas and along waterways, following scents that might have been overlooked. Helicopters traced paths invisible from the ground. Behind the scenes, cellular analysts reconstructed timelines down to the minute, mapping movement against opportunity. This was no longer a missing person case driven by hope. It had become a data-driven hunt for truth. And the trail was leading somewhere dark. Surveillance footage began to reveal a pattern that no number of words could explain away. On June 20th, Vincent appeared on camera at a gas station, moving with a quiet precision that seemed ordinary to an outsider, but carried sinister undertones for investigators. He asked for gloves, at first claiming he needed only one, then pocketing them as cameras followed every motion. Each step was deliberate, and each detail would later prove critical. This wasn't a casual errand, it was preparation. The gloves would become evidence, a small but telling piece of a much larger puzzle. Every camera, every timestamp was a reminder that nothing went unnoticed, that the digital world was capturing actions even when intentions were hidden. Shortly after, the Silverado became a moving stage for the crime. Surveillance footage captured the silver truck traveling across rural Pennsylvania, carrying with it the unmistakable bulk of a large green military-style container in its bed. A container, ordinary in appearance but extraordinary in consequence. The same box that would later seal the fate of Catelyn Harp. Routes through mountainous terrain were documented by traffic and security cameras, each frame confirming the movement and placement of what had been concealed in the shadows. Even seemingly mundane details, pauses at intersections, turns along empty roads were recorded, building a timeline impossible to refute. Investigators could already see the convergence of opportunity, mobility, and concealment in a way that spoke louder than any confession. Further evidence solidified the case, moving from observation to undeniable proof. A UTV, sold days after the disappearance, was tested by forensic teams and returned presumptive positive results for human blood on both the driver and passenger seats. Trail camera footage placed Vincent using that same vehicle just before the disappearance, linking him to the events leading up to the tragedy. Every piece of evidence, gloves, surveillance, truck, container, blood, formed a chain, each link reinforcing the last, connecting the man to a crime he had hoped to conceal. The green metal box was no longer just an object. It had become the centerpiece of the story, the tangible proof that one life had been confined, hidden, and betrayed. And the trail of evidence would continue to unravel, leaving deception exposed and truth unavoidable. While investigators combed through digital trails and surveillance footage, the search that mattered most was being led by someone who knew Katlyn better than anyone, her twin sister, Heather. Driven by intuition, memory, and love, Heather organized a team of about 15 family members and close friends into coordinated search parties. Maps were studied, areas divided, and calls made to anyone who might have seen or heard something. Social media became a tool of power, spreading Katlyn's photo and details far beyond the local community, enlisting strangers in the quest for truth. Every tip was followed, every lead pursued, and nothing was dismissed as coincidence. Their search was methodical, but it was also fueled by the instinctive knowledge that Katlyn would never abandon her children or disappear without a trace. This wasn't just persistence. It was determination shaped by an intimate understanding of the person they were trying to bring home. To help fund the exhaustive effort, a GoFundMe campaign was organized, quickly raising over $10,000 from supporters who connected with the urgency and sincerity of the search. Heather described the process in her own words, highlighting the mix of organized planning and raw emotional drive, reading messages, marking maps, verifying tips, and investigating on their own when official channels couldn't move fast enough. They refused to accept excuses, ignored the plausible theories that suggested she had left voluntarily, and kept pushing forward. "We were supposed to find her," Heather later said, capturing the weight of responsibility, the depth of connection, and the unyielding determination that would soon lead them to the discovery that everyone had feared but needed to confront. This was not luck, not chance. It was the result of relentless resolve powered by love, grief, and unshakable instinct. 9 days after Katlyn vanished, Heather and her search party reached the remote property at 86 Hart Lane, a densely forested, nearly 40-acre plot of mountainous terrain that was difficult to navigate. The steep slopes, thick undergrowth, and hidden clearings made the search grueling, each step heavy with fear and anticipation. As they called her name and scanned the forest floor, a grim certainty settled over the group. This was a place that could hide unspeakable secrets. Around 12:30 in the afternoon, that fear became reality. Just over 180 yards from a cliff edge, slightly north of where Vincent's old property line had been, they discovered it. A large green metal container, military style, secured with a padlock. Even from a distance, the smell was unmistakable, a sickening odor of decomposition that made the stomach churn and the heart sink. State police and emergency personnel responded quickly, cutting the padlock and opening the container to reveal human remains in an advanced state of decay. Identification came from a distinctive tattoo on her collarbone, a small heart marked with the numbers 1111, unmistakably Katlyn's. Columbia County Coroner Jeremy Reese pronounced her dead at 3:15 p.m., classifying the manner of death as homicide based on the circumstances, even before a full autopsy could be completed. The green metal box, once just an object in surveillance footage, had become the final, tangible confirmation of a truth that Heather and the investigators had feared but needed to confront. It was here, in this hidden corner of the mountain, that the story of deception, control, and violence came into brutal focus. The nightmare that had begun with a single missing message ended with a reality no one could ignore. By 7 that evening, Vincent Lloyd Harp was taken into custody without incident, arrested on charges of criminal homicide, abuse of a corpse, and tampering with evidence. The weight of the discovery pressed down not only on the family, but on the investigators who had pieced together a story that once seemed impossible to prove. At the coroner's office, Dr. Christopher Sullivan faced the difficult task of examining a body that had been confined in summer heat for over a week. Advanced decomposition limited the ability to determine trauma or pinpoint the exact cause of death. There were no gunshot wounds, no stab marks, no fractures that could provide immediate answers. Despite this, the circumstances surrounding the concealment of the body left no room for doubt about criminal activity, and the manner of death was officially classified as homicide, even though toxicology results were still pending. A week after his arrest, Vincent requested to speak with investigators from the Columbia County Correctional Facility, presenting a story that diverged dramatically from his prior explanations. He claimed that both he and Katlyn had been huffing nitrous oxide recreationally, inhaling laughing gas to escape the pressures of life for a brief time. In his version, Katlyn had placed a plastic bag over her face to heighten the effects, and he fell unconscious from the fumes. When he awoke, he claimed she was dead beside him, yet instead of calling for help, he panicked and decided to conceal the body. The story seemed rehearsed, contradictory, and impossible to verify, but it offered insight into the psychological mechanisms of someone trying to rationalize the unthinkable. Vincent confessed to disposing of Katlyn's phone and smartwatch by throwing them into Fishing Creek near the Bloomsburg Fairgrounds, an effort to erase digital evidence of his actions. He then transported her body in the same green metal container documented in surveillance footage to the remote property at 86 Hart Lane, claiming she had previously expressed a desire to be buried there. This confession, while framed around accidental death, reinforced the premeditated acts of concealment and deception that had already been established by investigators. Every detail, from the disposal of devices to the choice of burial location, painted a portrait of control, panic, and calculated evasion, leaving the legal and emotional consequences to ripple outward for his family, the community, and the investigators who had fought to uncover the truth.